All right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness Podcast. Today on the show, I have Max Strazny. I actually realized it was Strazny, not Strazny. I was calling you Strazny forever. Which is kind
Quick
of
correction, it's Strazny.
Okay,
You were close though. You were very close.
it's German, right?
Yeah,
Do you speak German?
I do.
Okay, say something in German.
Was macht du denn der?
What does that mean?
Means like, what are you doing there?
Cool. How it's like, I guess, are you like originally from Germany or is it like your family directly from there?
So my dad's side of the family is from Germany. And so I am a dual citizen. So I'm a citizen here and a citizen in Germany. But I wasn't born there. I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. So I'm still, primarily an American, but I have that German heritage as well.
Cool. Yeah, I've been to Germany once. I went to Munich my sophomore year of high school, and it was a lot of fun. I went to Rome, Munich, London, and Paris, and Munich was probably my favorite place just because like the Germans just keep things clean. They're like also systematized, and it kind of goes well with my personality. So I really like that.
And the roads are so nice.
Oh yeah, no, and like all their infrastructure is just really well kept. They do
Absolutely.
a good job. But Max is a bodybuilder. He is also has a pretty big following on YouTube, in particular, Instagram as well. And on this podcast, I kind of just wanted to go over a lot of questions that Max gets on his Instagram and YouTube, and also to discuss a little bit about contest prep and his plans and kind of how he's learned a little bit about how to program for himself, since Max is self-coached as of right now, and just give you guys some input on how to program for yourself. So I guess first off, just because I think it's just cool to see why everybody got into this. Why did you even start lifting?
Yeah, so my lifting journey started back when I was, I believe, like 15 and a half, maybe 16. So I was a soccer player and a swimmer for a lot of my life. So I was like super skinny, like in high school. Sophomore year, I remember being like 120 pounds at like 5'10". So I was a really skinny, like probably more 6 foot at that point. I'm currently 6'1". But like throughout my childhood, I'd gotten like bullied a lot for being small. And like I started watching some people on like YouTube. So like I'd watch like David Lade, I saw that type of shit. And it wasn't until I had like this back injury that I got like way back when I was initially starting with lifting. Like one of my first sessions that I went, I actually had a broken hand. So I was doing these like single arm like deadlift variations, and I ended up like feeling a snap in my lower back. And long story short, I ended up having like a bulging disc in my spine, which got me really interested in like learning a lot more about how to lift safely, looking into some research as to how to rehabilitate my injury, along with a lot of physical therapy, which also sparked my interest in becoming a physical therapist. But that's like what really got me into like wanting to lift, because like I had already wanted to with like my broken hand, but once I got that injury, I had heard from the doctors and like my parents and stuff that I was going to be like compromised my whole life, and that I should never like do squats or deadlifts. And me being me, I was like, fuck that, dude. I want to lift. This is a goal that I have. And I like really got into it after that. Started like a simple 5x5 program, and like 4.5 years later, here I am.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting seeing the motivation, and kind of how that injury got you, I guess, a little bit more, wanting to know actually how to program for yourself, and also that career change, because I find it's really interesting too with like injuries, like, and you can tell a lot about a person with how they do respond to adversity, or like if they do just listen, or if they're like really set on just creating their own path.
100%.
Especially because like right now, and the more I've learned about this sort of thing, I mean, doctors will usually say like, don't do that because they don't really like, their thing is to do no harm, and usually they
Liability
don't have
insurance.
the actual like education to actually know how to rehab. So they just say don't do that.
Right.
So yeah, so awesome. So obviously you got started off with like watching David Lay, which is kind of how I think a lot of people, especially our age, got
Mhm.
into it. And obviously David has more of the whole power building emphasis, where it's mostly squat, bench, deadlift, and then you do some bodybuilding accessories afterwards. So I kind of wanted to ask you about what was your experience doing that, and then what made you make the decision to change into really just strict bodybuilding training.
Yeah. So I think I should start explaining that from like back when, like I would say like a year and a half or 2 years into my training, I started like doing more of the power building approach. I was like training on some like similar programs to like what David Lade was doing. And I had also gotten coached by Elliot Atwell for a little bit. So you know, I was doing that power building training for a while, and then I think while I was at home, there was somebody at my YMCA back in Wisconsin that started talking to me about like RP a little bit, and so I looked up RP, and I was just trying to learn as much as I could, and I learned the importance of like specificity. So that's what initially got me into training, like specifically for powerlifting, because my current goals at that point were to like be really strong, have a really big deadlift, big bench, big squat. So I ended up joining a powerlifting team for about a year or so, and then like I was, training much more specifically for powerlifting and not trying to do both goals at once. And I made a lot of progress that way. And then so this was, I think, in 2020 when like quarantine hit and everything. I was training in a garage gym, and like with powerlifting, with like the high frequencies of super heavy sessions and stuff, I always struggled with a bit of like injuries. Like personally, I've not been someone to just never get injuries. um, they've happened to me quite a few times now, and my body just, I feel like, has a higher proclivity for injury compared to people that are more like built for powerlifting. So uh like during quarantine training, I was training at like a garage gym, and I ended up getting like this SI joint injury, which lasted for like a few months, which like sucked. That was probably the worst injury I've ever had. And and at that point I was like, well, if I'm going to keep getting these injuries, then I won't even be able to like train for strength the way I want to. And I also have like goals where I want to be like big. Like I kind of wanted to use powerlifting and strength training as a means to get bigger. But the more I learn about specificity and the importance of actually training for the goals that you have, I decided to drop powerlifting, quit the powerlifting team I was on, and start bodybuilding. And so like mid 2020 is kind of when I really started getting into bodybuilding.
So how did that impact your results once you started being a little more specific, especially with bodybuilding training?
Oh, the results I got were like huge, but it made a lot of sense because I was actually training specifically for hypertrophy and not trying to train for strength and hypertrophy at the same time. Um, and like the results, like I remember just like really like front to back thickness was something that I noticed pretty quickly with bodybuilding training, because I was doing more volume and not focusing so much on load. Um, and I didn't like gain a ton of body weight, but um, like I was certainly a lot leaner, and I had more muscle mass than I did when I was powerlifting, like within like 6 months of bodybuilding training, I would say.
Yeah, so I think that you put out something that's really good, something that I do talk about quite a bit. I really think anybody who has tried to do power building, initially works decently well for a little bit, because
Mhm.
obviously it's a novel stimulus and whatnot. But you definitely do need to change your programming basically to that specificity. And just specificity, just as for those listening that don't really understand the principle, it's exactly what Max said. With whatever your goals are, your program all needs to be revolved around that number one principle. That's number one principle of any diet or training program. And power building immediately violates that, because you're kind of all over the place. So say that you're trying to do like unless you set up with like a DUP approach, like you have like a strength day and like a hypertrophy day, like even then, like it's not going to be as maximally productive as if you're just training for one goal. I also think that you said something really good about powerlifting is definitely not for everybody, in the sense that you need to be really resilient to that injury and have the joints
Yeah.
and the structures that can actually take that beating. And then like just it's interesting because I noticed that when I personally did my powerlifting training, I've only really been specifically training around squat, bench, and deadlift, because usually what I've found for myself is bodybuilding is a lot more about training the muscles, and then powerlifting is about training the movements. And then usually how I structure training weeks and whatnot, it reflects that, and that's kind of how my program has been set up. And then ever since I went away from just like trying to do like mostly hypertrophy work, which is most of what my training was. I've noticed that once I started training movements and power lifts more specifically and having my program around that, like my results also got much better with my strength. Um, I wanted to ask you one thing with powerlifting. This is something that I've noticed, is that in terms of like MRVs, like maximum recoverable volumes, I noticed that like number one difference between routine like bodybuilding and powerlifting training for myself was like how much direct back work I could actually tolerate. Like with the actual
Oh
squat
yeah.
and deadlift, like I just can, like my MRV is super low. It's like 14 sets a week. Whereas if I was to like take away those, even just go down to like once a week squatting and maybe just start like a leg press, or once a week deadlifting, like I can add basically like another 4 sets, which is quite a big deal. Yeah, did you
Yeah.
feel most that happen to you?
Yeah. Well, like with my powerlifting training, I didn't do a whole lot of direct back work. Like it was very specific training. I would say like the amount of back work I did per week was maybe something like maybe like 10, like 8 to 12 sets a week or something of direct back work on top of like doing squats and deadlifts. But with like bodybuilding, at one point during my mass over the past year, I was training back 3 times a week, and I was able to recover from like 25 sets a week. So
Yeah. So
and
then obviously the gains were much better, right?
yeah, and also one thing I do want to touch on, like with the power building thing we also just talked about. Um, Power building, I do think, is an okay way to train if that's like what you enjoy, and if you're not trying to like compete in either bodybuilding or powerlifting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And usually like what a lot of powerlifting programs do look like actually are kind of like at least the good ones, they are well designed power building programs.
Mhm.
Because like something that people don't understand about powerlifting training is that like the hypertrophy base is like a huge thing. Like powerlifters mostly train like bodybuilders unless they're peaking.
Mhm.
Is usually what you'll find, but they just do squat, bench, and deadlift. Um, so I think all that was really good. So I guess let's go over like your recent mass phase, because so I guess like a little bit of background is I know that you did a cut down to 170 pounds or something like
Mhm.
that. And then you decided like I want to get bigger. And so I guess what was your whole mindset during that, and what did you learn over that time period? Like just like explain like the ins and outs of it.
Sure. Yeah. So
Because sorry,
I
one last thing I want to say is, especially because like I know a lot of kids are like you and I, who are tall, thin, naturally thin, um, and gaining weight tends to be the hardest part of this whole process for us. So like, and like maybe some tips also for like the skinny guys.
Sure. Yeah. Um, so to start, I did do a cut. I think it was like 8 or 10 weeks total, which was like the longest cut that I've ever done. I haven't done a whole lot of cuts in my life. I think that was the only like legit cut I had done. I'd done a mini cut before, but That was the first like legit cut I had done, and I got down to 170 pounds. And I went on like vacation, and then like I did have a plan to have a nice like productive mass after that. Um, so like while I obviously wanted to get bigger, it wasn't the plan to do a nice big mass after that. And basically, if I remember correctly, let me see here. I have like a huge Excel sheet with all of my bodybuilding training, which is really, really cool to look back at. Um, I think I did like four mesocycles of massing, which were like super productive. Like these are all consecutive mesocycles of massing. Not to say that that's a good idea. I probably should have incorporated a little bit more maintenance phases into there. But I did 4 mesocycles of it, and during that time, I think I went from about 170 pounds up to 185 ish, and I would say within those mesocycles, like my like muscle growth was the best, like up until I was about 185 pounds. Like the gains I was making were just like super incredible. Like I didn't expect to be making those kind of gains, and I stayed like really fairly lean throughout the entire mass, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, you didn't get above like 12% body fat, which is like
Yeah,
lean.
yeah. That was really cool. I didn't really expect that because I was eating a lot of food. Personally, my metabolism is pretty crazy. So during the mass, I got up to I think like 47 or 4,800 calories a day, which was a lot of food, but I was like really, really used to it towards the end. So like I had a really good schedule. Well, I guess these are some tips for like skinny guys that struggle to gain weight. Number one, I think the most important thing is to have like a schedule and an idea of what you're going to eat, when you're going to eat it, and just like kind of know what you're going to eat before you actually get to your day. Like I feel like if you go in without a plan and you just have to come up with 4,800 calories in a day, like that shit's just not going to happen unless you have a like plan and you know what you're going to eat and you know the foods that you're able to eat a lot of. I just feel like it's all really important. Just having a plan is like super important. And also like having a plan allows you to have a lot of consistency. So, eating similar things day to day was something that I did. And just like not missing meals, I think was a really important thing. And also eating out. I did eat a decent bit of junk food during the mass. Like I didn't really try to do it all clean. Like eating 4,800 calories clean would be really fucking hard. And I'm gonna be honest, I did not do that. I'd like cinnamon rolls every Saturday, like a full pack of cinnamon rolls every Saturday. That was like one of my big mass foods that I had. I definitely had my fair share of Caniac combos from Cane's. Um, had my fair share of Oreos, uh, but but that being said, like the base of the diet should be definitely composed more of like fruits and veggies, so you actually get your fiber in. I think getting your fiber in is really important, so you don't just get super constipated or something when you're massing. I feel like that's an issue a lot of people have. But yeah, I think also as far as my macros go, I was consistently eating like a good 200 grams of protein a day, so slightly in excess of a gram per pound of body weight, which is probably a little bit unnecessary now that I think about it. And I was eating like around 100 grams of fat. Towards the end of the mass, I started biasing a little bit more to fats just because it's easier to get more calories down with a little bit higher fats. But my carbohydrates were like in excess of like 600 grams per day for pretty much the whole mass, which was a lot of food to eat, a lot of carbohydrates to eat. But I got a rice cooker and that made it really easy. So that's a great tip. Get a rice cooker. um, yeah. And yeah, as far as like rate of gain goes, I gained about like a pound per week during the training weeks on deloads. So every like 5 or 6 weeks, I just went on maintenance. So just enough to maintain the body weight I was at, which is sometimes like technically in like that surplus as my body was adapting to the calories that I was eating. Like my massing calories quickly became maintenance calories, you know? So just kind of had to make quite a bit of jumps up with calories. And overall, I think the mass was like 8 months long.
Yeah, so I guess just out of curiosity, where did you start your calories at? Because you ended up at 48,800.
Hmm. I believe I started my calories at like 30, mm, like 35 or 3,800, I think, if I
Yeah.
can remember. Yeah.
And how frequently did you increase calories, and like what made you, I guess, like what were the decision making criteria for when to increase calories, and by how much did you usually add?
Yeah. So typically the way I increased my calories was really a lot based on how the scale was moving. If the scale wasn't moving, I was going to increase my calories. You know, there are a lot of other things involved, like stress and the amount of sodium you intake and whatnot. But like during a mass, I like really like to stick to the scale, because I think if you're not gaining, like if you're not actually gaining weight during your mass, the chances of you actually adding tissue are pretty low. So I was really focusing on the scale. I weighed myself every day, and if I had like a week of like eating and massing where I didn't gain any weight at all, I would usually like add a little bit of food to that, and the additions that I would make would usually be like 200 to 300 calories a week.
Yeah, I usually recommend about 2 weeks before making a sort of change on the mass, just because like I myself am a little bit like more conservative with that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But I don't think your approach was wrong at all. Especially, I would say that you're really trying to just maximize that gain. I think that's something that you have to
Mhm.
do. I also really like how you place that emphasis on, you know, actually getting that scale moving, because I do excuse me. I do think that that's a really important part about this whole thing. That a lot of people, it can be really easy to be like, oh, like my training is going well and like whatever. And
Mhm.
um, if you're not gaining body weight over time, you're probably not really putting on that much muscle, especially if you're relatively lean, like you were during that entire time. Like usually, if you're like under 12% body fat, like you're probably not going to be, have the actual energy to really maximize that muscle growth, as opposed to say if you're like a little bit higher, you might be able to get away with it a little bit more. Um, and so like kind of just being like a little more assertive with the calories. And I really like what you said about having like a meal schedule. So I wanted to delve into that a little bit more. And you said, finding foods that work for you, incorporating some junk. I guess, would you mind going through like what a typical structure will look like, since I assume it's fairly similar day to day?
Yeah. So because I had started the like before I started the mass, I was like on a cut. I think I was eating like 4 meals a day while I was cutting. And basically what I did for at least the first couple of mesocycles of massing was I stuck with 4 meals a day, and just ate like very similar foods to what I was eating during the cut. Because like during the cut, like you aren't eating that much food and you're just like, dang, I would really just like a little bit bigger meals here. So I just kind of like added more food into the meals I was already eating. And I pretty much rode that until like the meal size got so large where I was like, man, I like don't want to eat this amount of food anymore. So then I just added in another meal. And that made things a lot easier, and that allowed my body weight to continue going up. So that definitely helped a lot. And I think I ran, I believe, like 5 meals a day for the rest of my mass. I don't think I ever got to like 6, but like towards the end of my mass, I was like doing the 5 meals a day, but also having like maybe a little bit of snacks in there or something. Um, and also one thing about my massing that uh, just like how it usually goes for me is it's it's never happened to me where I like ate way too much in a surplus and like gained a shitload of weight that I didn't mean to gain. Like it takes my body like so much food in order to gain that like typically I'm not worried about adding a little bit of food, because my body like will just do everything in his power to stay the same weight. Like it's like the gain just comes after like being really consistent with that surplus and, just always being in the surplus. So
Yeah, I think that's actually still something that basically how adaptive your metabolism is upwards.
mhm.
Obviously going from 3,500 calories or 3,800 whatever within that range to literally 1,000 calories above it within an 8 month time period. Like that's a pretty high adaptation
Mhm.
upwards. And I think that that's important for people to take into consideration, especially if you're naturally a thinner person. You're
Yeah.
probably not going to have that risk of fat gain the way that you would, or if you do, cutting is so easy for
Yeah.
people like us, especially because like what we said, you ended your mass on like 4,800 calories. You could go in like a very big deficit, like 1,000 calories from that point, and be mid 3,500s, and that's still plenty of food.
Yeah.
So I guess like you said that your meals were basically similar day to day. Would you mind giving a little bit of context as to like what the specific foods were, like different meals?
Sure. Yeah. Um, let's see if I can remember correctly. For quite a while, I ate like two bagels in the morning with peanut butter and a smoothie. That was like my go-to breakfast for a long time. Um, Typically, then I would get home. I would have so I guess I was having like kind of 5 meals a day here because I would eat like maybe a couple granola bars or a couple of Rice Krispie treats, and then I go hit the gym, um, like between my classes and whatnot. And then I would come home from the gym. I would have my lunch, which usually consisted of, well, for a while, I didn't have a rice cooker, so I didn't make good rice. So I hated rice. But I would have like some sort of pasta. I would have like ground turkey or chicken and like some mixed veggies. And then a couple hours later, I would have my dinner, which dinner was the place where I would like vary things a little bit. That was the place where I would have like some different meals. So sometimes it would be like steak and sweet potato fries and maybe like some other vegetable. But other times it could also be like some sort of rice and like seafood, like shrimp or tilapia or something like that. Something a little lower in fat. Um, so like my dinners could really vary quite a bit. And then my last meal of the day would always be the same, which would always be like 340 grams of non-fat Greek yogurt with some granola and some honey. And that's like the meal that I literally have had every single night for like the past like 3 years.
Yeah, I really like just the reason why I thought it would be good to go into that is because I really do find that having that structure, like you said, and having those foods that you're not thinking about too much, you kind of know this is what works well for me. And I know that Eric Helms also talked about having like a default diet structure,
Yeah.
basically because even if you're going to like a cut, like I always say, like habits should be built during maintenance and massing, like during those periods, and then you still carry those into mini cutting or cutting. It's just maybe slightly different principles apply of food choices, but having that general structure that works really well for you, choosing foods that you still enjoy, that you tolerate well. So that's all really, really awesome stuff. And obviously you didn't neglect your fruit or vegetables too during that time. So that's also really, really, really good. I know that we have had plenty of conversations about this, but I know that one thing that you did change was the importance of actually getting in a daily activity outside of the gym.
Hmm.
Actually shooting for a step count. So I guess let's talk about like your first mass and the differences between NEAT and outcomes and like whatnot. Just
Yeah.
for those that are unaware, NEAT stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and it's basically just subconscious movements, or say, step counts are a good way to basically measure that NEAT or daily activity. So I'll let you go from here.
Sure. So during my sophomore year of college, which was 2020 to 2022 to 2021, sorry, not 2 years long. I pretty much like this was during quarantine and like I was doing all of my classes online. So I was spending a lot of time in my apartment and the only time that I would leave was when I went to the gym. So overall, like during the day, I would get something probably like 3 to 5,000 steps a day. And that made things so hard. And I can't believe I did that. Like, number one, it's unhealthy to move that little. Like, I was pretty much sedentary. And I was like massing during that time. So like I had no appetite at all. Like I would just eat, go in my room, come back out, eat after another 2 hours, just keep doing that. And like my appetite was terrible. I like hated massing so much. Um, like training was going okay. Um, but I would say like when I started this mass and I did my neat completely differently, my gains were a lot better. Like I didn't gain as much body fat as quickly. I was able to have a good appetite throughout my mass. Like eating a lot of food wasn't that difficult for me. I didn't hate massing. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. But like during this most recent mass, my neat was somewhere around like 10 to 12,000 steps a day. So like pretty much double the amount of neat that I was doing as compared to my first mass back in sophomore year.
Yeah. That's something that I think a lot of people neglect. And I know that my coaching experience, and that's actually one of the biggest things that I always change with my clients. So I'm like, okay, like let's get a step goal. Let's like move around more than 5,000 steps a day. Let's get, more towards
Yeah.
that. I know that Dr. Mike Israel, which we'll talk about him soon, usually recommends, that 10 to 15,000 step range is a really awesome place to just be in general. Not only does it help with like digestion, better body composition, there's actually was a really cool research article in Mass, which is monthly application in strength sports. A research review by Eric Trexler, Eric Helms, Mike Zordos, and Greg Knuckles, where they were talking about how like you need to have like there's worse like recovery training outcomes, body composition outcomes like under 8,000 steps per day. So
Yeah.
even if you do
Oh
weight
yeah.
train and you do that, it's like you still need to get that physical activity. I know that Mike also in a video recently, he's like, he was kind of making fun of bodybuilders who don't really focus on that step count. They just do cardio. They're like, I want to do 45 minutes of cardio. They're like, come on, do nothing, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got like 5,000 steps a day. You're still sedentary.
Yeah,
Uh,
dude. Like, also while that research like shows that, dude, you should get a little bit more steps in that. Like taking the amount of or being as sedentary as I was last year during my mass, like literally everything was worse. Like life as a whole was worse. Like I think the reason that I did it was because I was like super hyper focused on specificity, and I wanted all of my like energy to be burned in the gym. And like I thought anything else would be like taken away from my recovery capacity and stuff like that. So yeah, terrible idea. Don't be as sedentary as I was and get your 10,000 steps a day.
yeah, it'll and like you said, it'll only help your appetite and your diet and your digestion. Exercise is directly supportive of a healthy gut. So
And your mood and just how your life goes as a whole, honestly.
yeah, absolutely. So I think that was a really good general overview of massing advice for hard gainers and whatnot. So I guess so. Obviously, we talked a little about Renaissance periodization, RP. So I wanted to first go off as I know they are and were your number one sources of inspiration and advice, which they have like an amazing YouTube channel. They've been absolutely crushing it. It's like you could basically get your degree from Renaissance Periodization's YouTube channel and all this stuff.
Straight up.
So in terms of learning about how to self-coach, what are your biggest pieces of advice with that? Because there is an art to it. It's difficult, but you were very successful with it. So how did you go about really learning things for yourself? And what is our advice for other people who may be interested in doing this themselves? They're a kid in college. They can't really afford to hire a well-qualified coach.
Yeah. So number one thing I would say is like always be a student to the game. Like there's always more that you can learn. And I would also say that a really important thing is to be like, if you're self-coaching, you need to be objective about your training, how things are going. You need to be objective about your diet. You can't be making emotional decisions. There's just not room for that. That's where like a coach comes in. Like the coach is able to make those objective decisions for you, and like for sure have no emotions in it. But like if you're self-coaching, it's really important to like be able to be objective about it, or as objective enough in order to allow your training to actually do something. So for example, you need to stick with an exercise for like at least 5 weeks if you really want to like see if it's going to be helpful for you. Like you can't just be like, oh, like I don't really feel like doing this exercise, it didn't feel good last week, I'm just going to go ahead and do something else. Like then you just don't give the exercise enough time to actually work. So I think that's really important. And then like places to learn from, like I think it's really important to always try to like learn from people that are smarter than you. Like I feel like a lot of people in bodybuilding, or it's easy for people to get results and then say like, well, my way is the best, like this is the only way that you can gain muscle, and no other way is better than what I'm doing. And I think it's important to like keep an open mind when it comes to training in general. um like bodybuilding and powerlifting and stuff is all like very clouded by a lot of anecdotal evidence. And while anecdotal evidence is important, there's also some fundamental scientific evidence out there that gives you like a basic like framework of what your training should look like. And RP is a great place, like a great place for information to like be able to build that framework for yourself. And RP has been a great like source of information for me. I've also listened to like so many episodes of Arrive Stronger. That is probably like my most listened podcast ever, or probably the thing I've listened to most on Spotify. So I definitely recommend listening to that. And then I think there's also a lot of benefit in like following specific people on like Instagram, like people that you that you can learn from, and maybe people that like challenge how you think. So for example, I'm like super involved with the like science, like sciencey evidence-based community. But I do see that there is some stake in some anecdotal evidence, because there's not a ton of studies out there that like tell you exactly how you should train. There's not a lot of studies on like healthy like individuals, and there's absolutely not a lot of studies on people that are trained, because number one, people don't want to be like, okay, I'm going to join this study and I'm going to screw off with whatever I was planning on training and do whatever these researchers tell me to do. Like it takes a lot for people to actually commit to that, and like commit to something that would be a longitudinal study. So studies are limited. So anecdotal evidence, while there's a lot of bad anecdotal evidence out there, there's also a lot of good anecdotal evidence, and there's a lot of grains of truth in there. So some people that I followed to like see how they do things are people like from the Camp Jansen coaching team. So like one in particular was like Nick Loff. Some of the stuff that he posts about sometimes is a little bit like disagreeing with some more like science-based stuff. But I think it's important to like follow people that challenge the way you think, so you don't like stick to one approach and like don't allow your mind to be open and actually like critically think about what you're doing your training.
I think that's all really great advice. But being objective first and foremost with yourself. Basically, being very, very honest with yourself and not letting those emotions guide your decisions. Being willing to also stay open to new information, and always kind of wanting to somewhat improve your process, because I think that that's something that I'm coached right now. But a lot of it is like guided by myself, since I am a coach. And one of the things that my coach and I always do after every single training block, every single training cycle, is we think, how could we improve upon this past training block? How could we, what are other areas that we could improve upon? Because I think it's like, while you can find something that does work for you, for you, like there's always ways that you can improve it. And plus, because we know of one, the sub principle of specificity is also that, there's going to be like adaptive resistance built up over time. So you need to like change something up in some meaningful way over time, whether or not that's exercise selection, a certain rep range that you're using, whatever it could be. There's always ways that you can poke holes in your system and find ways to be better. And then also finding just sources of information that are well qualified, I think, first and foremost, like, and usually that comes down to, do they actually have an education in this or not? Because I do think that is extremely important, and you should probably form the bulk of your training decisions off of that. But like what you said, there's also limitations to studies, and so you need to be willing to look around and say, like, okay, like based off of these principles I have learned from science, what are different ways that people are applying this, and how is that working out for them? How can I apply this to myself? Is really important. And so I bet that you've just spent, obviously this is your passion, so you have spent hours and hours and hours. So that is one caveat. If you really want to self-coach, if you really want to do this well and really understand things, you need to actually have an education and understand the nuances a little bit, because unfortunately there's not one black and white answer. There's only principles, and it is going to change over time depending upon where you're at in whatever phase that you are at. So
yeah,
I think that was really great.
You do bring up a really, really good point that I did want to touch on. I do think it's very important to take most of your information from people that have a background in science, that people that actually understand physiology, that know the fundamentals of how the human body works. Like that will tell you so much, and it will allow you to have a basic understanding of how things should work, and will allow you to understand like exercises or like ways of training from more of like a like a fundamental basis to like actually understand if they should work or not. So like I think it's important to like follow people that have an education, and not just follow that one dude on TikTok that doesn't have any education and just like spits out stuff that he thinks works. I think it's really important to have that background of education. So that should definitely form like the most of like what your information is from.
Whenever you are looking at those case studies of like, hey, like this works well for this bodybuilder, always come back to those principles. Why does that work? Yep.
Understand the mechanisms behind what's going on.
Yeah, because one of the things that does bother me, and I know that Jared Feather and I have talked about this off and on, is like people that say like, it works for me, science is useless. It's like, it's working because of some principle of science. Like exactly. It informs everything that you're doing, and whether or not you know exactly like why it works, it's working because of some underlying mechanism. I do find that what I found for myself and a lot of clients is that like, if they can understand like why I'm asking them to do something, or like why something is working, their buy-in is way better, and they're going to be like, and it's like Steve Hall talks about it, like it's like a boat, it's like a guiding ship. It's like, and one thing is so cool that once you understand that and why something's happening, all you have to do is just trust the plan, follow it, and you're going to get results. Whereas I think a lot of people with this go throughout wishing and hoping, and they're like, I hope this works. It might not work, I don't know. If you actually understand science, it's like, I know for certain if I follow this plan with these principles, I'm going to get X result.
Yeah, and if you don't get results, you know how you can change it to get results.
Yeah,
it's so cool. And like I feel like that's just like there's so much free information out there. If you're going into the gym and just like doing what you want, and like are just kind of like throwing coins in the wishing well, just hoping that you're gonna make some gains, like you don't have to do that. There's so much good information out there, and you can design a training program that fits your goals exactly and will actually be able to get you to your goals, like for sure. makes so much sense. And like it just feels so good to be able to like do something and like know that you're going in the right direction, you know?
I agree. So I guess going forward, to wrap things up, let's talk a little bit about your competition prep plans, and then this recent internship that you landed with a pretty cool company.
Oh yeah. So yeah, my competition plans, I will be competing on September 24th at a show here in St. Louis. I believe it's called the NANBF Gateway Natural. So I'm starting prep next week, Monday. So I'm about six days out from starting prep, which is going to be an 18-week prep. I was really going to do like 16 weeks. Well, to start, it was going to be 20 weeks, and then we switched to 16 weeks. I'm pretty lean. But I ended up deciding to go for 18 because this is my first prep. And I wanted to have enough time, and also enough time to like have maybe a diet break in there, like when I go home and stuff. But this will be my first prep ever. Really excited for it. I'm going to be coached by Sam Okinola, who is an RP elite physique coach. If you don't know who he is, definitely follow him. And so I'm definitely in good hands for prep. And yeah.
Awesome. And so I guess going over your internship for RP, which I know that you just got that.
Yeah. So also going off of RP, as Sam is an RP coach, I had met Mike and Jared and Charlie back at the NPC Midwest in 2021, which was which was a bodybuilding show here in St. Louis. They literally were like 10 minutes away from my apartment. So like I think I learned about the show like maybe a week in advance or something, and I was like, holy shit, I'm about to meet the RP guys. So I was like fanboying super hard, ended up going to it. And like Sam and I like went to that together, and so like I met all the guys, which was really cool. Had talked with Mike a lot about like my major and stuff. Like I was kind of thinking about maybe going for athletic training instead of physical therapy. So I talked about that a lot. And since then, I've talked with Mike like off and on, every now and then if I had like questions about training or stuff. And more recently, this I would say about like a month ago, I was like thinking about some internships, and like I was thinking about doing like an internship here in St. Louis. But then I was also like, what if there would be something I could do for RP? That would be really cool. And it would be cool to be involved with RP, like maybe for the long term, but having an internship is kind of getting into it. But I ended up messaging Mike, and I was like, hey, like I'm looking for an internship. I was wondering if there's anything I could do for you guys. And turns out that he did have something to do for me, and I'm currently running Dr. Mike's TikTok. So that's what I'm doing right now. So it's a little internship, but it's been great. And I've definitely learned a lot, and it's really, really cool to be working with RP.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So I guess where can people find you? Follow along your prep and whatnot.
Sure. So I would say I'm probably most active on Instagram. So I'm at Max Strazny. That's MAXSTRAZNY. And then I'm also fairly active on YouTube. I'm going to have a prep series on YouTube, and that is also just Max Strazny. And I also have a TikTok if you want to follow me there. I don't post on there quite as much, but Instagram and YouTube are my shit. So I appreciate the follow and appreciate the listen.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you guys for listening, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.
Peace.